Welcome to this video on the peoples of Kenya up to the 19th century. We will explore the origin, migration, and settlement of the people of Kenya, focusing on the Bantu, Nilotes, and Kushites. Finally, we'll cover the results of these migrations and settlements. The people of Kenya have diverse origins. East Africa is considered the cradle of humankind. Early inhabitants included hunter-gatherers, but they were assimilated or displaced by groups like the Bantu and Nilotes. The Kushites were also among the earliest inhabitants. The Cushitic speakers include the Eastern Kushites, such as the Borana, Somali, and Oromo, who originated from the north, in Somali or Ethiopia. The Oromo arrived in the 16th century, settling near Lake Turkana and reaching the coast by 1600 AD, displacing the Mijikenda and Pokomo. The Borana are Oromo-speaking people from southern Ethiopia. Their migration began in the late 19th century, settling in Wajir, Marsabit, and Moyale, and today occupy the area north of the Tana River. The Somali, the largest Eastern Kushite group, were living in Mogadishu by the 10th century and moved southwards after being threatened by the Oromo. The southern Kushites migrated from the Ethiopian highlands into Kenya, occupying grasslands between 2,500 and 3,000 years ago as pastoralists. Few remain in East Africa today, as most were absorbed by the Bantu and other Kushites. Reasons for the Kushite migration included the search for grazing land, population pressure, escaping feuds, disease outbreaks, avoiding attacks, and a spirit of adventure. The migration of the Kushites led to the introduction of livestock farming and cultural practices like circumcision and the age-set system. It also caused conflict over land, trade expansion, intermarriages, and increased population in settled areas. They were later influenced by the Bantu in farming and ironworking. The Bantu are the largest language group in Africa, speaking related languages. Originating from southeastern Nigeria or the Congo Basin, they moved southwards in a slow, gradual migration. Those who settled in Kenya arrived in two groups, forming the Eastern and Western Bantu. This map illustrates the general routes of the Bantu migration across Africa. Reasons for the Bantu migration include escaping drought and famine, searching for fertile land, avoiding external attacks, and fleeing diseases. Their knowledge of ironworking led to increased food production and subsequent population pressure, forcing them to seek new areas. The Western Bantu, including the Abakuria, Abagusia, Abaluhia, and Abasuba, settled in the western part of Kenya. The Abaluhia are descendants of various groups and completed their migration between the 15th and 17th centuries, interacting with groups like the Maasai, Kalenjin, and Luo. The Abagusi originated from Meaningfree and migrated eastwards, settling around River Nzoia Valley and Ramogi Hill. They were pushed by the Luo and eventually settled in the Kisii highlands by the second half of the 18th century, after conflicts with the Kipsigis and Maasai. The Abakuria also originated from Misri and settled in South Nyanza by 1800 AD, interacting with the southern Kushites and the Luo. The Abasuba are descendants of refugees from Uganda, settling in the islands of Lake Victoria, and their culture was considerably influenced by the Luo. The Highland Bantu include the Akamba, Agikuyu, Ameru, Ayembu, and Mbire, who are part of the Eastern Bantu. The Eastern Bantu are further divided into Coastal and Highlands Bantu, extending from east of the Rift Valley to the coast. The Coastal Bantu, like the Mijikenda, Pokomo, and Taita, migrated from west of Lake Victoria to Shungwaya. The Mijikenda trace their origin to Shungwaya. They settled in 9 fortified villages, known as kayas, just inland from the coast. By the 19th century, they were established as middlemen in the long-distance trade between the Akamba and Waswahili. The Pokomo migrated from Shungwaya and settled along the Tana River, where they interacted with Cushitic and Waswahili communities. The Taita are of mixed origin, first settling at Marajia Hill in the 16th century. Today, they live on the 3 hills of Daivida, Sagala, and Kisigani. The Akamba came from Mount Kilimanjaro, settling around 1300 AD before moving to Taita Hills. Population pressure forced them to migrate to areas like Kitui and Iveti by the early 19th century. The Agikuyu's origin myth points to Murang'a. They moved southwest from the coast around 1400 AD, following the Tana River. The Ameru claim Mbwa at the coast as their origin. They were pushed by the Oromo from Shungwaya into Igembe and Tigania regions. They settled further inland, crossing the Tana River. Subgroups like the Chuka, Mwimbi, Imenti, and others settled east and west of the Tana River. The Bantu migration increased population, led to intermarriage, and spread ironworking and agriculture. It also expanded trade, increased cultural interaction, and caused inter-community conflicts over land. Some communities, like the Gumba, were displaced. The Nilotes include the River Lake Nilotes, such as the Luo, who originated from Bahr el Ghazal in southern Sudan. They migrated to Uganda and then entered Kenya in 4 distinct groups, including the Joka Jok, who were the first to arrive in Siaya district by the 15th century. The Joka Oani arrived second in Kenya, settling in Sogoma in Alego in the 17th century, before moving to Kisumu and South Nyanza. The Joka Omolo came from northern Banyoro, eventually settling in Ugenya and Jem. The Abasuba are Bantu refugees from Uganda who intermarried with the Luo. Reasons for the Luo migration included population pressure, internal feuds, external threats, diseases, drought, and a spirit of adventure. As pastoralists, they also moved in search of fresh grazing lands and water. The Luo migration resulted in intermarriages and assimilation of groups like the Luhya. It increased the population in the settled areas, boosted trading activities, and led to the displacement of the Western Bantus and Maasai. They also adopted agriculture alongside pastoralism. The Plain Nilotes include the Maasai, Iteso, Samburu, Turkana, and Njemps. They entered East Africa from north of Lake Turkana around 1000 AD, moving through southwest Ethiopia. The Plain Nilotes migrated due to the search for fresh grazing land and water, drought, famine, population pressure, and internal or external attacks. They were also driven by the outbreak of cattle and human diseases, along with a spirit of adventure. The Ateso originated from Ethiopia or Sudan, settling in Karamoja before moving southeast to eastern Uganda and western Kenya. The Maasai also came from north of Lake Turkana, and by the 17th century, spread southward along the Rift Valley to areas like Laikipia and Ngong. The Plain Nilotes migration increased conflicts and insecurity, displaced the southern Kushites, and led to the assimilation of groups like the Dorobo. They intermarried with neighbors, promoted trade, and adopted practices like circumcision and the age-set system. The Highland Nilotes include Kalenjin speakers like the Tugen, Nandi, and Kipsigis. They originated from southwest Ethiopia, north of Lake Turkana, and moved southwards to settle on the slopes of Mount Elgon, which became their main dispersal area. From Mount Elgon, the Terek moved southwards, arriving in modern Asembo before settling in Tiriki, and today live in Nyangori. The Tugen moved southeast from Mount Elgon to settle in areas like Eldamaravine and Cabernet. The Kipsigis moved southeast from Mount Elgon to settle near Lake Baringo. They displaced the southern Kushites and absorbed others. Later, they moved to Belgut and Kipsigis, forcing the Abagusi to relocate. The Nandi moved southwards to Tat, then Tambach, Rongai, and finally settled at Aldai. The migration of the Highland Nilotes into Kenya was driven by population increase, external attacks, internal conflicts, drought, famine, the outbreak of diseases, and a general spirit of adventure. External factors from their neighbors also contributed to their movement. The settlement of the Highland Nilotes resulted in intermarriage with neighbors, like the Abagusii and Luo. They displaced the Maasai, increased population in settled regions, and assimilated some communities, such as the southern Kushites. Trade increased, but so did inter-community conflicts over resources. This concludes our video on the peoples of Kenya up to the 19th century.